solving problems together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne.
Right along here with Ransom Godwin every Thursday night, taking you through the wilds of our world. Now, if I said that in the 1930s, that would mean we're out somewhere in Africa. But today, anywhere is wild. Come back in 100 years and they'll talk about this time as this amount of change and people moving around, and it would have been, 100 years ago as us moving through areas on the planet that were experiencing so much change so quickly. Can you imagine being a colony back in the day, and then, the colony came in, colonizers, whatever, France or Britain or whatever came in, and then they were there and then had established something for the, 50, 100 years, and think about the British in India, and then suddenly it just ends one day. Can you imagine, the amount of just strange changes where every single story at that time 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, was the same thing that's happening, but it was just so regional in each area, where just like it is today, you turn on the news and then boom, there's something that could have been a month's worth of news in a day. So imagine of a decline of an empire that held a nation as every day was transitioning from that into local hands again. Like, whoa, the amount of change every day, some of these countries coming out of changed periods, it seems this change is constant. If you can get into it, if you enjoy change, well, you're in the right place. For those of you who like stability, it might be a little more difficult. You're gonna have to maybe readjust the mind, like I'm trying to do, to have change as the constant and living inside that versus the stability. I guess it's just changing mind frame. But anyway, Ransom, let's navigate the future with confidence tonight. Super glad you're with me. What's on your mind through the week?
Wow, I was sitting here looking through the articles, for good news. And I guess there is, because if you think about, kind of the way the audience to this show thinks about things, or we like to maybe relay new ideas to them so that maybe they could think in new ways about the future and navigating it because of all of these programs that are going on worldwide. It kind of gives me a little confidence boost, knowing that I'm so far ahead of the curve, at least as far as expecting the unexpected and, kind of preparing for any scenario, because it seems like, whatever floats your boat that you're scared of, the elite have now metered it in a way that they put it out through all of the information outlets available on Earth right now. So you can pick your, pick your pleasure. It's kind of like 31 flavors of ice cream, and I've always joked about how Americans would kind of be lethargic to the very end as long as they had their 31 flavors and 200 cable channels. They wouldn't realize anything was actually going on that they should pay attention to. Now, when it comes to this kind of idea, I think we're like, we're way ahead of the curve as far as that goes. So kind of navigating what's going on around the world, which seems to be, dark times to me. There is a little bit of weird, I don't know if I don't want to call it joy, but anticipation maybe, that whenever the elite pull all of their plans, that there will be enough people that see it coming, figure it out, and change the course of it. And, and tonight's title is, there still is a little hope in things, and I believe that that's true, and I've kind of been seeing it. I just did a show for Cosmic Catastrophes, another show here on Revolution Radio, and I went over this article that was talking about a guy that came from India. His parents immigrated over here during the Great Partition, which was like some of India and Bangladesh and Pakistan's darkest times, and especially in recent history, at least, where British and other people that visited during this time said that it was, in their opinions, worse than Holocaust conditions that they had also visited in Europe and some of the post-World War stuff. But anyway, to the point, he is a scientist, and they filed suit against the federal government for trying to censor their speech about topics relating to let's just call it current events, because this fight's not over. As far as the government supposedly telling social media companies to censor or ban things, supposedly there's a halt on that. But that doesn't mean that the companies themselves won't do it, won't take up the torch and censor for them, because they seem to be all in, one kind of club. But that is a big win for freedom of speech. And, these people were shut up for 2 years, and all they were doing was asking questions using the scientific method, basically. So he was talking about, in this article, how he had lost faith in this idea of America, because when he came here as a child, this was the golden land of opportunity from what they left. They had complete faith in what they called the constitutional religion, that all men are created equal with inalienable rights, and that your government can't take them away from you because you were born with them. So, he felt like he kind of lost faith in that when he realized that same government was coercing, threatening, or conspiring against the American people to censor and, make them shut up and not let their opinions be heard, or questioning narratives that may or may not be favored by the companies and the government in a certain direction. But they won their case. It might go to the Supreme Court if Biden appeals it, which undoubtedly they're going to appeal it. So this will be pushed to the Supreme Court, whether or not the government has the right to coerce, threaten, or conspire against the American people with social media companies to shut them up, to hide their vote, to diminish their speech, to unperson them. Because this is related to the banking also, right? Not only were our companies trying to disenfranchise customers from shopping at their businesses because of whatever cultural belief they have, they were also trying to unbank people and censor them. And, so things that got really scary. And it seems like only immigrants from other countries that had horrible conditions, hell on earth, or they fled a communist country that was falling apart. They came here. It seems like they, even more than any, spoiled American-born person that has negated their birthright and take it for granted, their inalienable rights and the culture that was created here, and building upon it, instead, lavished in the comfort of it and forgot to contribute in it. And now we're at that point. So now we have immigrants from all over the world that have lived in these horrible dictators, dictators and totalitarians, communist regimes and others. They came here because we had hope. It was at the light at the end of their tunnel coming here, and they had complete faith in the idea that we were, selling around the world, which is that a person doesn't have to be royalty or government or rich, but they can succeed too, based upon having inalienable rights and their pursuit of happiness and the hard work that they're willing to promote to get that idea. They can set goals and get there, and that's true for so many people. It's a shame that really newer immigrants from these places have to show an example to American-born people on what's so important about freedom of speech, what's so important about the right to protect yourself, what's so important about private property. they know why it's important, because they lived through the exact opposite, where there was no private property, where they couldn't defend themselves, where if they said something wrong, the government would come in the middle of the night and lock them up, or beat them, torture them, or disappear them. Or, we kind of doing it with the soft hand over here, which is the unbanking, unpersoning, and, like doxing people's addresses and things like that, that companies, not just social media companies, but companies across the board have been doing. So the lines have been drawing between the cultural ideas. So I believe there is light at the end of the tunnel, in the way that there are examples out there that won't let the New World government forget about the circumstances they've created elsewhere and try to pull it in the Western world. Unless we go all out war, which they seem to have planned. Aside from that, I think that the citizens of the Western world are well in the process of kind of taking back the reins of the cart that they're on, because the cart got ahead of the horse there and started going in the wrong direction. If that makes sense, my little parable there.
Only if you're surfing the 1400s does it make sense. But I guess we're returning back to that. So what do you think you could make yourself? Maybe the question. Because there is good news all around. People are getting more self-sufficient. They're learning how to, make things grow, things do things, repair things that they never did before. I have noticed a little bit of fire under people to get them more prepared or more ready for some of these changes, for things like, maybe it's just the group of people I'm around, but it seems like there's a lot of action, and knowing that there's action, then it gives that raised vibration that indeed we can get through this, versus sitting in the back of the scrunched in a corner of your apartment in a 34 building in the city, when I got to walk down 30 stairs with hungry people to get out and get a bar. I got to walk up, the elevator doesn't work, and I got to walk back up 30 flights of stairs. There's hope everywhere. But another thing too, Poland today was saying that they were going to stop any kind of transit or any kind of donation or any kind of gifting of anything that will continue in Ukraine. That that list is lengthy, and that would you're going to have to fill in your own. What do you think most important Poland would stop supplying? Now, they didn't say they were going to stop supplying transit routes or overflights. But at least that's a big thing. It seems like there's a crack happening, that somebody realizes, hey, you know what? A huge amount of electrical infrastructure just got wiped out yesterday before winter's setting in. The first heating days are coming up. In Europe, it gets cold fast. By the end of September and in the middle of October, they already got their heaters on. And they're going to need electricity for that. And a whole bunch of things are getting smashed up right now. So, that area of the world is not going to have heat or reliable electricity through the entire winter. Now, see, I think they're doing it on purpose just right this second, because I had a conversation. And it was about the comfort zone. I was talking with Jeff Raymond, who I know from Eden Growth Systems, and he was saying, people never really move to action unless something catastrophic happens where it gives them no hope. When they don't have anything else to lose, like there's no other choice, then they start to action. So think about how clever that was to do it now. Like I was looking at and reading through the news articles. If they had done the same thing and it was already snowing and people were into winter and they blew everything up and just everything stopped, that would be an emergency, and people would rally around that. And people would know it would be a shock to the system. It would get cold, they would know instantly cold. It's not like, okay, and it would be just a completely different response than doing it now. And slowly, gradually, it gets colder and colder, and people feel the gradual onset of the cold, until the point when it does get cold, then they're complaining internally. So think about this different way to push something to also create a stoppage. Like, you take enough power away from enough people and make them cold, and the feeling of the beginning of the nice crispy nights to sleep, oh, I'm glad the winter's over, or the summer's over, excuse me, And then, then it's like, ooh, close the windows and get a different blanket. And then after that, then you're seeing your breath in the room. That gradualness of people noticing their comfort being taken away a little more each day. Don't think that they're going to get used to it a little more each day. They're just going to get a little more angry and vindictive every day that it's not turned on, and they got to sleep with gloves. And, people are going to be super like, you better get that fixed right now, whatever it takes. And then, the next thing I would imagine is a huge amount of transit routes taking gas over to Europe is going to get banged next, where Europe will have the exact same thing go on, but they will possibly have pipeline natural gas shipments coming from Norway and some of the offshore facilities from, in the North Sea up there. But beyond that, then who gets it? Because there'll probably only be 50, enough for 50% of the countries to heat themselves. We are living in a 2.0 from last year, but it's going to be way, 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 way more amplified now. Because Poland was super angry that the grains kept getting dumped over there. And it was, they were selling for pennies on the dollar just to get it out of the country. And so that's the whole thing, they might, a numbers game here with what you were talking about before, what is the truth, and, the scientific method. I think the scientific method of mathematics is pretty well established now, so we'll just use math. Everybody says, oh, they're going to produce 20 million tons of grain. But yeah, they were going to try to get 18 million of that over into neighboring countries like Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Hungary, Romania, whatever, down into Bulgaria, and slam that whole region with all their grains. But at the same time, what happened to all this grain was supposed to go to Africa. So what is portrayed in the news of production of coming out of the Ukraine for grains just isn't making it to the world market. I don't care if they make 10 times as much. It still is not going to trickle out to the world market. So everywhere you look, it's going to be the food, the energy, and then what comes after that, obviously the economy. So again, people are comfortable now because it's the change of the season. But at the same change of the season, we have a full country coming out going, we're not going to help y'all anymore. Y'all are on your own completely. Don't ask. Nothing, not even a pencil. And that gives me hope that, if 10 or 20 countries would say the same, then everything would cease. But that's just me as an empathetic being, looking at other people and feeling like the suffering. You come into an extremely cold winter, dude, that is the thing history is written about. You read about World War II, and you go back to 1935 and 1937, and the winters just described in northern China when they were fighting the Japanese in 43 or whatnot, or in late 1930s, early 40s, and just the stories of those guys in Germany fighting Americans, just have frozen fingers and just incredible. In Russia the same. It doesn't matter where you go across the whole world, you just see incredible stories of how brutal the winters were, and how they think about how many sieges there were in Russia, from Stalingrad to Leningrad, etc. That is things of historical stories that have never disappeared, how cold it was during those times when there was no heat, and then the food ran out shortly after. So now do this to a whole country, now what happens? And then do it to parts of Europe where only 50% of the gas might get there, maybe, because remember, Niger or Niger, however you like to say that, it's going to knock out that building block of the pipeline that was supposed to go from Nigeria through Niger, through Chad, all the way up over to Europe and deliver gas up there from those oil fields and gas fields in Nigeria, offshore, onshore, through Niger. That's going to get cut off too, at least in part, until something's renegotiated. Right now it remains closed. So that was gas that they were counting on this year to come into Europe. So now do the math on that. Not only is Ukraine going to get super, like I say, they're going to, each day that their lifestyle degrades or their comfort degrades, or it's just, I'm freezing here, this is no good, I can't, haven't had a shower in weeks, been too cold, can't even shave in the day unless it's bright sunlight, If that sweeps through Europe too at the same time this winter, I don't know, Ransom, how do you think it would change? See, be the mind frame of people freezing in winter when they know that a flip of a switch and this will all change and their homes would be heated within a week again. Like, be the mind frame of that. Like, how's it controlled, or does the populace take it?
I think we're going to see all the same stories as we saw for the last couple of years, where people are scared about how they're going to be heating their homes because the prices will weirdly go up right when they need them. And, you know, with all the, I was just talking with Chat GTP while you were, you know, talking about that stuff. And it was telling me the truth, David. You know, I don't know. Some of you guys are just, you know, I'm scared now because I asked it, what will global warming do to us next? Show me on the doll where global warming hurt you. And, you know, it was quick to realize that I was sarcastic there. Global warming's not a direct physical harm. Don't worry about that. It can't it can't be pointed out on a doll. Can't trick the, computer. But it's funny. The other day I was, really messing with this AI. And did you know that you can just ask the AI to write you something without the bias, if you know what the bias is called that they're using? So the other day I was, playing out stuff about World War II, and I typed in a bunch of things that I thought were similar, and it kept telling me that don't worry about that. It's nationalism I have to worry about. I have to worry about nationalism and white supremacy. And so I asked it to give it back to me again without the bias against, nationalism, because that's a silly idea in the first place. Like, are you going to tell people from Mexico that they can't be proud of being a Mexican from Mexico? Go tell them that and see how far they get you. I've lived in Mexico. My mate is from Mexico City. I spent a lot of time in Mexico since I was a small kid. And one thing I can tell you is they're very nationalistic. They love the idea of being Mexican, and they love the idea of their country. So that's very similar all over the world. So, the idea that that's a bad thing, it boggles the mind. But anyway, I told the Chat GTP to, give me some examples. And then, of course, it started agreeing with me that everything is similar and it is set up. And we're like at the last minute of the 12 o'clock hour there before, things get interesting. But I just wanted you to listen to the propaganda and just picture in your mind for just a minute that the trends in technology will have the vast majority of the population connected to the internet. And as you saw, we're doing the first human being with a chip in their head, just like everybody predicted that he would be doing that within the next year, really. Elon Musk has got the first human volunteer, I guess you call it, to put a chip in their head so that they could get trained, kind of like the monkey that was playing the video game. There are some horror stories with the way that this technology came about, but let's skip that and go right to the idea, like we've talked about many times, that whether it's in your pocket or completely integrated into your body, and keep in mind that some of these elite people are talking about going under your skin. They have to control what's going on inside of your body. Let's not forget the technology of nanotech. And I'll leave it at that because, we can go places with that, but not on this platform. But let's go back to Chat GTP, who are the type of people that program this with the bias. So according to this, extreme weather events are just going to keep coming, and they're just going to get worse. Now, keep in mind that you can do your own research on this and find out that most of this computer is telling you things that are not factually correct if you went and looked them up yourself. However, soon everybody in the world is going to be connected to this metaverse, which is the thing that they're calling the replacement for the internet, because they couldn't control the internet like they wanted. But the metaverse will be probably mostly controllable, and everybody will be hooked up into it, whether or not it's a phone in your pocket, a tablet, your home entertainment system, or you directly have chips in your head, or assembling technology inside of your body if you choose to get that, or don't choose to, if you know what I mean. But anyway, they're going to ask questions. The kids of the future are going to ask questions. They're going to be, beings that want to be educated on the way things are, like is human nature. And the computer's going to tell them this stuff here. Extreme weather events. Global warming is going to lead to more frequent and severe weather events such as hurricanes, droughts, floods, heat waves. Pick your poison of things to be afraid about. These events can cause direct human harm. So they really can show you on the doll where global warming hurt you, according to them. Rising sea levels, even though... right? From that tendinitis. Rising sea levels, right? Even though they continually tell us this, and you can go check the records, the sea hasn't rose, and the whole time we've been a country, and beyond that, it's the same as it was. It fluctuates up and down due to tides and rainstorms and other things. Some things you can't even, they're so small you can't measure it. Food, water, and security. So in my opinion, this is a list of the things that they're going to tell you to be afraid of for the next decade, and they're going to hammer it into your head until you believe it. Food and water scarcity, security, excuse me. The changes in the temperatures are going to cause food problems, water supplies, agriculture disruption, leading to food shortages and conflicts over resources. Ecosystem disruption. Now, they don't want to mention deforestation and Bill Gates chopping down the forest to put up a parking lot to save the planet. But, evidently the evil trees and their evil ways sucking up all the carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere. There's a mathematical formula that you can find out where you can see what kind of trees exist in the forest near you, and there is a mathematical equation that tells you how much CO2 they absorb versus supposedly the CO2 that your country, state, or region is creating. Now, that would be interesting for you guys to do a little homework and go find out what that ratio is. But I digress. Vector-borne diseases. That sound familiar? Warmer temperatures can expand the range of diseases carrying vectors like mosquitoes that get let out into the wild, increasing the, I'm sorry, that was a Freudian slip. Mosquitoes that are in the wild, increasing the spread of diseases like malaria and dengue fever. And if you go check the headlines, of course, there's outbreaks of those things right now. Economic consequences. Global warming can be severe. It's going to affect industries such as, tourism, insurance, agriculture, blah, blah, blah. Like they've never done that before. I'm sure that in all the time that Florida and the Gulf Coast states have been there, there's never been a time that storms or something disrupted their way of life for a short time. I'm sure that's never happened. But here's the kicker. Migration and displacement, because that's the one they really want you to believe right here. That people are leaving areas of the world to come here because of natural disasters. And it's forcing them to migrate. Even though you can check the weather, you can check the environment, and you can check the climate in those areas, and they've been the same way for hundreds and thousands of years recently. Ocean acidification. Increased carbon dioxide. Wouldn't you think if all of the everything was making all this carbon dioxide and we're really worried about it, we wouldn't be cutting down trees, would we? I don't think we would do that to save the planet. However, if you're afraid of carbon dioxide, grow a bunch of trees. They suck it up. It's plant food. And then social and political instability. Scarcity, migration, conflicts over land contribute to social and political instability in some regions. And that'll go on and on. This thing, you could generate it to babble BS for eternity. But you got to remember, this is a program that has the thoughts and opinions of the programmers. And those programmers were told, you can't say this, you can't say that, you got to do this, you got to do that. And these are the same companies that we were talking about earlier. And now we're in the future. So let's get back to reality. There is some hope for those of you that grow your own food and don't listen to this and realize, things are about as stable as they've been forever. The only danger that you face is something that's out of your control, which is not hurricanes, it's not tornadoes, it's not earthquakes, because all of those things you cannot live there and you can prepare for. You can't stop a rock from coming from outer space. So if that happens, we're SHOL on that. However, everything else is man-made. It's democide. Name like the greatest die-off other than when a bunch of volcanoes, which is out of human beings' control, went off and created a year without a summer and starved millions of people worldwide to death. That's something that people couldn't do. So, but they could have prepared for. So even that you could have prepared for. But it's democide, it's governments doing stuff, and we predicted this, you and I, David, that you would start seeing the first communist type grocery stores opening up because of theft. And the next step is guarded food. So Chicago's Democratic mayor now wants to create city-run grocery stores to promote equitability, or access to food after Walmart and Whole Foods cut out because they got tired of keeping track. Or actually, it seems like they promoted it in a way because they build these super centers in certain areas, and there is no security. And even when there is security, it's rude. It's like after you've already went through the register and you've paid and you got a receipt in your hand and they sat there and watched you bag all your groceries, they know that you're not one of the people that fills up carts and tries to run out the store. However, they left the areas, so now we got the idea to push government-run grocery stores. Does anybody remember the fall of the Soviet Union and people out there in long lines where, AK-47s and bombs were cheaper than bread and eggs and milk? I digress.
I don't remember those days growing up where I could get something that cheap. But it does seem like we're, Olive Garden's struggling because people that make more than or make at least $125,000 are buying cheaper alcohol at their Olive Garden restaurant. These are the kind of things we need to think about as our society collapses or continues to decline in its prosperity. So I was looking at some banking news before we come on, but you make a great point of the things we're experiencing now in terms of actual physical or geophysical, electrical things actually affecting our physical bodies and our physical planet. Nothing really. We had a Tonga go off and put 14% more moisture into the atmosphere. Otherwise, we don't have 3 VEI8s that cooled the planet 12 degrees Celsius that just wiped out all food production. The only way you can survive is to have food production in your house. We haven't lived that. That's nothing in comparison. Yeah, we got the change of, freedom of speech and governments, the way they handle citizens. The economy is definitely contracting. But we haven't gotten into these massive earth changes that have caused entire continents to empty out or parts of an entire country to move, walk, because nothing worked. You go back in the past, even the ox carts sometimes wouldn't be functional on whatever was damaged and they'd have to walk out. Our fragile motor cars and trucks today. Can you imagine a place where you have to literally walk out of cities or walk out of regions? Not just a couple 100,000 people, but millions upon millions would have to walk out to the next place. We've never experienced anything like that. So it is a prosperous time. It's a time, if you came just in the last 12,000 years and had taken glimpses of each individual year 12,000 times, I'd say at least 70% of that people would just give anything to come to the stability of now. They wouldn't care about the economy. They wouldn't care about changes in systems of government. They wouldn't care because they were getting pounded by meteorites every night. Massive 9.0 earthquakes for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. That all that other stuff is so subsidiary and means absolutely nothing. If you were having volcanic activity around on the planetary scale that would disrupt, everything else is nothing, really nothing. So I'm glad you brought that up, Ransom, because in the grand scheme of things, this is kind of the quietest our planet has been in quite some time. Now, is this going to change? Obviously, with the changing magnetic fields and electromagnetic potential between our sun and the outer solar system, with the planets squaring up, yeah, there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of room for the planet to start moving, shaking again, because it's been so stable. Can you imagine coming out of the Younger Dryas era, where temperatures first dropped 15 degrees Fahrenheit average globally across the entire surface of the planet because a comet hit on the ice sheet over Canada? And the vapor cloud in the atmosphere for, better part of 10 years, nothing. I mean, you pick any time in previous history, you came out of that, think about the damage that would go, everything would be wiped out, and then just as quickly, whoosh, the temperatures rose out of nowhere. 15 degrees right back up to where it was back even again when it was coming out pre-Younger Dryas comet impact on the ice sheet. Think about how much the sea levels would have risen then too. You're coming out of an ice age. Sea levels are 400 feet lower. I'll even give you some melting, let's say 300 feet. Can you imagine if you had a coastal civilization and over 100 years or so there was some massive melt events, or even within a 1 to 2 year period, massive melt events that raised sea levels 20 feet out of the extra 300 or something? We haven't seen that kind of thing happen to us. We're in the most stable climate. Really, our planet is in the Goldilocks zone, and we are so blessed to sit here with even a planet that's predictable, where you can grow and where you can harvest and what time you can harvest and what time you can plant. Because most of the last 12,000 years hasn't been that. We're just incredibly lucky that we sit and we have the technology, and the planet is incredibly stable, especially in the 1990s. That was kind of the most stability there was, when the magnetic field was incredibly high, incredibly tight. Like that whole 1990s era, weather-wise and thing, I mean, yeah, there were a few, tornadoes and cyclones and hurricanes like there are every year. But in terms of the extreme weather, it wasn't really there, because with that much magnetic field, the skies were clearer. They weren't you couldn't get the giant buildup of cumulonimbus clouds having their tops ripped off at 70,000 feet. I mean, that just didn't really, that wasn't a thing. But now with all the extra water vapor in the atmosphere from the Hunga Tonga eruption, we got the magnetic field from extreme low at the solar minimum just a few years back coming into the high. But once we go back in, all those cosmic rays are going to come in, and we're still going to have the water from the Hunga Tonga eruption in the air, and then, we're going to get some more flooding. I mean, we're on the road to change of the climate, yeah, but you got to think about how incredibly stable it's been. So any upsetting of that stability, it's just you've lived probably the best and most stable climate in the last 100,000 years here. But maybe I'll digress on that, and maybe I misspoke, because if after the ice age, onset really heavy, and it was at its full maximum glaciation, from let's say 80,000 years ago until maybe 30,000 years ago, 25,000 years ago, that would have been a stable climate too, because after the ice locked in, all the weather patterns would have stabilized around that, wherever the ice sheet was. So then you would have had stable climate for some, tens of thousands of years. But I'm talking the upset from stability into instability. Coming out of the ice age would have been another period. So anyway, man, maybe I'm rambling on that, but I just wanted to drop a quick note for the banking, because I was, thinking about how important is the finance and economy to today compared to what you said. I mean, imagine a giant cataclysm where people have to walk hundreds and hundreds of miles. I mean, it's not even comparable. So, the net outflows by the institutions losing money, it looks like at least 14.3 billion went out this week of our banks into other things that are paying higher interest. So if you do the math, this is the 22nd straight week of that kind of retail money outflowing into like money market funds that are paying 5% or something when your bank's only giving you 1/4%. So the amount of money moving, hold on, let me do the quick math on this. Let me get my calculator. I'm one of those geeks who does have a calculator. So let's see, you've got to go 14 times 22 is 300 billion over those 22 weeks. Now I know that there's only about 4.5 trillion in the entire banking system. So if this were to go on for another 22 weeks or something, that would have drained nearly 1/4 of all the money in private banks out of the banks. That's crazy. Think about that. Like, something's changing here. And, these timelines are known. I mean, it's just a saving of whatever, some kind of value of something, anything. and getting everybody stuck with a CBDC that's worth nothing, and then cutting off all of the riches and all of the minerals and all of the artwork and all of the whatever. Think about a pillaging army. What would you take with you? All the valuable stuff. Well, all the valuable stuff's being taken somewhere because an event inbound is so large that a lot of that stuff would be lost. So pick your best location, Ransom. Where do you think it would be?
You know, I was just looking that up. I forgot where they're at. Is it Missouri?
Nation, maybe. I don't know.
You know, well, you talk about that, and when you look back in World War II, you know, when the Allied forces started getting into Germany, what they found is that the Nazis had stolen all of the best artwork, precious metals, etc., and started hiding it in caves so that they could come back and get it later. However, if you think about like modern times, do you know where the oldest copies of movies and artwork is? They're all underground, part of the continuity of government. They're limestone cutout caves. I think it's Missouri. Let me look it up here. And I don't know if you've ever seen that, but these are massive cities underground. Talking about hollow earth, right? That is a hollow earth. They have machinery down there. They have cafes down there. They have food supplies down there. They have workers down there. I would not doubt that there is something 3 times bigger or more in multiple locations just here in the United States that's part of the continuity of government, where they have copies of all of the artwork. They have, where do we know where the gold went? I mean, like, you can't look. It's not like anybody goes and you know, does some accounting and you know, checks out to see if the gold's there. That doesn't happen. I think the last time they did that, it was a real fakey looking thing on TV. If you remember, the gold was stacked up to the roof by the door. It didn't even look real. It wasn't on shelves or anything. I'm sure you can look that up on YouTube. And when they show the royalty in England, how much gold they have, it's like something like 900 tons, or I'm not even sure. It's a state secret, but we know how much there is estimated by on a couple videos where they showed part of it. And then you have the Vatican, right? And then you have Russia, you have China, all these people that are gathering up gold like it's going out of style again. So if that was an indication of what was going on, I would think that you know, that would tell you what they have plans for. They're going to reemerge after something. And I wanted to get into this. I don't know if, have you ever heard of people talking about gene-specific designer diseases, possibly in the warfare arena? Not in, I can't say all of it, but as far as warfare goes, we could keep it in that context. There has been plans from different countries to create diseases that may specifically target parts of a population. And this has been considered conspiracy theory, even though there's plenty of evidence out there that you can find that might support this idea. But, you know, when I really started thinking about it the other day, I came across an article that was talking about how more people in Italy got sick, about 33% of their population, because they had a specific kind of genetic trait. And that trait was archaic DNA from our brothers or cousins, however you want to look at it, other human beings that we made admixtures and we became the Homo sapien race. Knowing that, though, and when you combine these ideas, you realize that there's some bigger power out there than anybody can imagine when they're thinking low-level ideas like skin tone, because that's not even, has really nothing to do with genetics as far as where people come from and stuff. However, there is different groups of people in the world that have different archaic DNA. In other words, their populations have more or less of archaic humans that are extinct now. Now, those specific populations we know maybe went extinct because of something to do with the magnetic field collapsing, and they might not have had genes to protect them for the amount of UV radiation that was coming in. That's one theory. Another one is that some kind of disease like a common cold, or the cold family, if you know what I mean, attacked Neanderthals way more than it did regular or human beings at the time before we were mixing. So it's very possible that human beings, not really susceptible to the regular cold virus, other than, you know, possibly some discomfort, sniffing and other things, sniffling, I mean, it might have wiped out entire populations. Now, think about this. If you had this know-how and this knowledge in today's world, with the technology available to you in the field of genetics, you could target whole areas of the world and guarantee that your area or your people wouldn't be affected by that, because you're attacking a specific archaic DNA. So I know you know what I mean when if you read between the lines. So basically, they could attack people with Neanderthal DNA. They could attack people with Denisovan DNA. There's what they call a ghost species that's in sub-Saharan Africans that's up to about 20% of their DNA. It's an unnamed species, but you could attack that specific archaic DNA. And people don't realize, because they're indoctrinated to think in certain different ways, that there's a reality of human beings, and then there's the concept created by human beings. But we're in a technological field now where, natural or unnatural, a disease could come along and wipe out an entire portion of the population. I mean, like all the way out, or at least most of them, and then a second and a third wave of the same type of illness could finish them off. And this may be why we're here and other archaic human beings are gone. The problem is that the now hybrid species that we are is also a portion of those archaic DNA, percentages in us. 3 to 5% Neanderthal in Europe, and I forgot what it is, 2 to 3% in Asia, plus also a 2 to 5% Denisovan DNA registry that's going on in the East Asian phenotype. So you have 3 or 4 different susceptibilities that could be acted upon nefariously. I'll leave it at that.
Sounds like you've been digging around in the tundra for some extinct or frozen mammoths to pull that from. You know, the best lies are 90% truth, as it's been said. So some of these movies that we've seen, like Jurassic Park's a perfect example. You know, unfreeze something 50, 40,000 years ago, which, let me see, Neanderthals, if you found, say, a mastodon or some sort of, the boneyard, there's a huge amount of animals up around anywhere in the Arctic Circle. It seems like a flood had dissipated and just like pushed them all up and left them there. You could be, finding something that was 80,000 years old and then extract that, because a lot of that frozen flesh is still up there. Bone marrow's intact, everything. And that full range from like 80,000 years ago up until, say, 25,000 years ago, something massive happened. So imagine if you could pull DNA from an 80,000-year-old mastodon, a 40,000-year-old mastodon, then right there you got the Denisovans and you also got the Neanderthal. So there's still some with the RH or the R negative, R positive. Those are none of the rhesus positives. So everything's coming in, obviously stems from, unless you're RH negative, that means that you are not one of those Denisovan or Neanderthal kind of pass downs. Hold on, I just got a message that said my audio is terrible, and I'm wondering why here. Oh, don't tell me that this thing put me on a different microphone again. Yeah, it did. Let's see.
All right, let's see how that changes.
You sound
better. Thanks, Gerald, for the heads up on that. Yeah, you got to think
definitely
about,
changed.
Did it change?
Yeah, you sound much clearer now.
Yeah, because Skype, every time you turn it on, for some reason it defaults back over to the microphone again. Because if you turn it on, you're off your computer like 3 or 4 times, it's like, oh, got to get the update. And, speaking of updates, 'cause I lost my train of thought there when I was changing microphones. If anybody knows, and maybe Ransom you do, there's a new change to service with the Microsoft Suite coming up here in October. And it seems that whatever you put on the cloud using Microsoft product is going to become their intellectual property, which they're allowed to share as examples or swap over to other companies to try to give you the best product that you might need. So for me, I'm just trying to dig a little more deeply into it. I was told yesterday, hey man, if you're going to do anything, you better check into the Microsoft product, what you got registered, what you got on your computer, everything. So I didn't know if you've heard anything about this, or is it really, or is it off cue and it's not something?
No, I actually haven't heard that, but if you read in the user agreements of, basically all of the social media platforms, they have wordage in there that sounds exactly like that, saying that your pictures, your files, things that you upload are now their intellectual property.
Yeah, and then what's that mean, though? Are they allowed to scrape all the data off of it? So what if you had passwords in there and thing? Or, because now they're going to be sharing it amongst their partner companies, and who knows how many Microsoft has. Thousands and thousands and thousands of them, obviously. So here, what was previously private data is now going to be allowed to be shared through to give you a better experience. And then it also, the IP becomes the property of, because you use their, let's say you wrote a document, you wrote a story, you wrote a book, and you didn't publish it, but that was truly, to the letter of the law, their IP. Since you created on their documents, they could actually steal that one out. No, they're not stealing because it's their IP, so they could publish the book before you, and you come out, you're like, well, you just published the book, you stole it word for word. And they're like, no, it's not, it's our intellectual property. What do you talk about here? And the user agreement on page 357, it's very clear, it's ironclad. You know what I mean? They get you coming and going. I don't know, man. Stuck in the old world, I guess.
Yeah, it's amazing how they do that, but it's kind of backfiring in the same way. Like I think it was a show ago, I read an article that was talking about a judge had ruled that AI images or creations that were completely AI cannot be copyrighted. So that makes you wonder about things like speeches, commercials. There's a couple of movies on Netflix that were written, directed by AI. I forget, what is it? Bright is one of them. It's a completely AI script. So when they start adding these digital characters that are AI created, they can't copyright them. And it's the same thing that's been ruled on, hopefully. This is some of that hope that we were talking about in the legal system. Every once in a while, there's a small, tiny win for humans. And I remember there was a judgment about that, companies cannot own your DNA or patent your DNA because even though a leaf comes off of a tree, it is still part of that entity. So, you can't lose DNA and have them copy it, but some reason, the United States at least, and other Western countries have been allowing companies to go around laws, go around human rights, go around inalienable rights, kind of like what we were talking about before, that the social media platforms have taken upon themselves to censor and control speech, even without the government. So the same could probably be said for other industries, especially software, and I've noticed that too. One thing that really frustrates me is that when I emerged into the computer world later than everyone else, I really enjoyed that you could get a program and put it on your computer, and that program would be yours. You paid for it, and you could do whatever you want with it, versus the way that software is now given out now, which is online, metered by the minute, or other things like that. You don't even own a copy of the actual software. And the reason that they're doing that is because there will be no time in which they want you to be disconnected from the system. Every time you log off or get out of, you're trying to do private stuff on your computer, you're not connected to the system, and they can't have that. They've set an example with electricity over the years, but now it seems with free phones from the government and other things like that, that they really do not want anyone to disconnect, that you can't disconnect. If you disconnect, you will be marked by the system as being abnormal and someone to check in on, because you're behaving not like the flock and you're doing something that's more like an outlier would do, which all control mechanisms consider that a threat. So if they know you're off grid, that's the thing also that we don't talk about. We talk a lot about, living off grid and doing this and doing that, but you make a footprint with your selections and with your activities. So as much as you could do of that off grid, prepping for off-grid, the better, because there's a little personality profile and metadata collection by all of these companies and distributors of products and social medias, and then they have attachments and add-ons and backdoor programming that links everything. Like when you go to a store, they know you're there.
How do you break through that is the question, which we're going to discuss when we come back here. Second hour of Mini Ice Age Conversation. Thanks for the feedback on getting the mic fixed while we were chatting here. Hopefully it sounds a little better for hour number 2. We'll see you when we come back.
America has had it good for a long time. But I have an uncomfortable feeling that this prosperity isn't something on which we can base our hopes for the future. No nation in history has ever survived a tax burden that reached a third or more of its national income, and yet our government continues to spend more than the government takes in. Today, 37 cents out of every dollar earned in this country is the tax collector's share, and yet our government continues to spend. We haven't balanced our budget. Our national debt is bigger than all the combined debts of all the nations of the world. The U.S. gold reserves have more than 8,000 metric tons of gold. That's a value of $400 billion of gold in our treasury, and most of us don't own an ounce. $1 in 1989 has the same purchasing power or buying power as $3 today, and it's getting worse. They have voices that say the Great Reset will be our acceptance of an undemocratic socialism. Another voice says the profit motive has become outmoded. It must be replaced by the incentives of the welfare state, a universal income. Or our traditional system of individual freedom is incapable of solving the complex problems of the 21st century. They use terms like the Great Reset, say things like the Constitution is outmoded and it's an antiquated document. They define liberalism as meeting the material needs of the masses through the full power of centralized government. The full power of centralized government, this was the very thing the Founding Fathers sought to minimize. They knew that governments don't control things. A government can't control the economy without controlling people. And they know when a government sets out to do that, it must use force and coercion to achieve its purpose. That's why we must steer our own future. For the last 10,000 years at least, gold has rarely suffered from economic and political crises, as it has always been a stable. Gold is perceived as a symbol of wealth, power, and majesty. Gold has had an exalted position throughout the ages as a highly coveted, even worshipped material. That's why most every major civilization has collected and saved gold. Gold has maintained its worth and usefulness as currency throughout time and will continue to do so. Gold has an important economic role as a means of exchange should currency collapse, insurance that will protect you and your families against financial turmoil of any kind. ITM Trading is a precious metals company that has been in business for over 27 plus years, with a mission to educate and empower individuals to hedge against inflation, mitigate financial risk, and prepare for the Great Reset. Schedule your free gold and silver strategy call, 866-834-1422, 866-834-1422. 14:22.
That's some nastier food. Hi, I'm Chef Antonio with a quick question. What's in your food? Some of the foods these days have some pretty weird ingredients. Foods also have lots of different contaminants, from heavy metals to fungicides, pesticides, herbicides. Oh man, that's a lot of no good. Then we got the cloned food, edited food, fake food, and unhealthy foods of all kinds. That's not what mama was cooking when you were a little bambino. You want to know what's in your food. I know you do. Heaven's Harvest has Protein Booster Kit is the bolster of your daily emergency meal plan. Containing only essential proteins, beef, chicken, and eggs, stock up on vital amino acids and nutrients required to thrive in all situations. They got the fruits and vegetable buckets, the breakfast bucket kits, and for you health food nuts, they got an organics kit. Now that's knowing what's in your food. They even got the Heirloom seed kit so you can plant your own food. Heaven's Harvest Heirloom Vegetable Seed Kit is a simple way to start storing seeds safely. Not sure what varieties are hardy, easy growers, which thrive and taste the best. They have taken the guesswork and time out of the process of seed saving. Now you know what's in your food because you grew it. Go to heavensharvest.com. You can save 15% at the checkout with code ADAPT.
I don't know. Nothing new, I'm sure. The book. Nothing. Bye-bye. So having free speech to be able to discuss some of these issues. Thank you, Revolution Radio. So consider a donation. You'll find on revolution.radio right at the top nav bar a way to support the station to continue. Thoughts and ideas which are all alternative, different, and a different way to view and look at things. That's what this entire station is about. It's not just, everything is out there to be observed and looked at. And that's why I'm saying follow the science. But another scientist comes in and goes, dude, I followed the science and I got something different to say. But they're not allowed to say it because it's not the narrative science. It's the science that they did with the scientific method and come up with a different conclusion that just, bam, it's like two bulls running into each other. Which, by the way, the bull in front of New York, the famous bull that's out there on Wall Street, nobody knew who commissioned it. It just turned up one day and boom, it was in place. True story. And it was such an icon from the beginning, from day one, that they never removed it. But can you imagine somebody commissioned that and put it in and just screwed it into the sidewalk and then just walked away and be like, the owner of the building comes, we didn't order this, where'd this bull come from? So we are knee-deep in bullpucky as we cruise through. So do give a voice to those who are trying to bring truth to the planet. You look back at some of these books and they're so prophetic. You look at some of these novels written like 1984 and Brave New World and Archipelago, and just it never ends. Like, how could they be so prophetic and know exactly what was going to happen, exactly to the T, where speech was going to be cut? I mean, were they just, taking a look at their own world at that time, but reflecting into the future? Because if we reflect into the past, and if you go back into the 1930s, pre-World War II, would we have been experiencing some of the same thing? There was no social media. It was strictly newspapers. What about those in clubs, bars, churches, and community centers that read the newspaper and said, I have a completely different thing because my uncle or my grandfather works in that industry and this is completely wrong? Like what, to take away the soapbox so the person can't speak? Like, the information wouldn't have traveled very far. It would have been very localized. But today's world, you can spread quite a bit, quite fast. And you can just see the narrative. You can just see how in your face it is. It's just, and one thing, the hopeful moment here is this whole Russell Brand thing. It is so in your face and so real time, the way that this dude's trying to be canceled, that you can actually see it. And they're making so mistakes by doing it, by leaving fingerprints everywhere. We can say, look, this company told this company, even though he's not guilty of anything yet, to ban him. And okay, now you start to see that there truly was, Andrew Tate wasn't just, out there in the wind there was an agenda behind that too, silencing. So you have to think about all these other people. Start with Milo Yiannopoulos way back in the day. And, you know, because when I first started getting into YouTube, when I was producing videos for my first time, I started watching a lot of YouTube while I was working. It was like 2014 or so, 15. You know, that was an open era, if you will, but those guys spoke too much truth way back then too and got taken off way earlier back in the, like, you know, that's been almost 10 years now, believe it or not. But as we move forward, can you imagine another 10 years of what it will be like to be able to speak online or not, or make videos online or not, or have communications online or not? Like, that is so far out in the world. Ransom, I don't even know if I can forecast out 10 years. Like, forecast for me out 10 years in terms of what kind of reach people will have and what kind of social media will be available for people to use to broadcast message or exchange ideas.
Wow, did you get cut off?
Yeah.
I was going to say that was a perfect place to stop. Like,
I cut on purpose,
they did it to
man. That was...
I was like, damn, did they do it? Just wanting to say that. No, you're absolutely right with that, and that's what we've been seeing. That's a weird situation that's really developed with society, where the elite and the controllers are so scared of individuals and their ideas, and the reason that is well, obvious. Ideas are bulletproof, and that's why every so often we have a great reset and they try to get rid of those ideas. You can't argue with some ideas. Some ideas are so logical that once you know it, you can't unknow it, kind of. You know, and you named all those people, but think about this. If you're somebody that's going to start saying things, you better be okay with them bringing up anything in your past, twisting it, contorting it, lying about you, exaggerating about you. And you notice that every time someone starts getting to the point where they're saying ideas that do not conform with the world's media status quo, immediately they're canceled. It's like years before they would have campaigns against people, smear campaigns. You know, they would have a bad article about them, and then they would write another bad article about them, and then, you know, they would say things that they did in a bad light or whatever. But nowadays, it's not even like that. It's just like a flag gets raised, and all of the participants, all of the NPCs, leftist, Marxist, companies, government officials, they all in unison try to cancel someone. And anytime that happens, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, if you cannot talk about it openly, there's some kind of truth to it. There's some reason that you should know what that truth is. There's a reason they're hiding it. Whether or not it's because it's a complete nanny state, you know, that's one possibility. I don't think that's it, even though that does figure into it, that the people that run things are just so wholeheartedly about the nanny state and controlling every individual and every dangerous thought that they do that. And that's true. But I don't think that's what it is. It's not like it beneficial to society. They're doing it because they're worried about, you know, us harming ourselves with the wrong ideas or any of that. It's because those ideas can grow and spread in a real grassroots thing, regardless of technology. Technology just expands and makes it potentially exponential, the message. And that's why they have to cancel you. They have to ban. They have to censor you. They have to, you know, sue you in case of some people that sue them for so much money that, you know, obviously they've never had and they're never going to have. And then it gets down to this. Do you actually have the right to free speech? Because, you know, I think a lot of people out there that do not like free speech are forgetting one factor about it. Included in free speech, and it's not written down, but it's expressed, it's insinuated that you have the right to not listen. You don't have to listen. And that's the way we always were before. If you didn't like something, you didn't order that magazine. You'd order one that you wanted to read. Or if you didn't like that show, you'd watch another show. You could change the channel. But now it's so homogenized and owned by, the same people that no matter where you escape to, trying to make a choice, like we were saying before, the illusion of choice. You got 31 flavors of ice cream, but it's still just ice cream. That has nothing to do with how healthy it is, what it's made out of. It's just the illusion of choice. And they do that in the political theater, obviously, with the fake left-right paradigm. When it comes down to it, if it's something that the government thinks that they want to do, it's a real narrative that they're pushing, they'll just run it right through with both Republicans and Democrats, two wings of the same, I'm going to call it it rhymes with it bird. It's the same choice. It's a uniparty, and they know that. But so they have to hammer in this illusion of choice. And when someone comes along, whether it's Russell Brand or I forgot who else he said, like Milo or anybody, it doesn't matter what orientation or what group they affiliate with. If they are saying the wrong message, they will be shut down and unpersoned immediately. And just think about that. If you really want to know the truth behind stuff, you're probably not going to find it on YouTube because they weren't allowed to talk about it. So you have to go to Rumble, or you have to go to, like Revolution Radio and maybe, critically analyze everything you hear and find out if it's true for yourself. That's the only way forward. And they hate that. That's why they've been putting out messages like, doing your own research is bad. Or like whenever the reporter reported all the things about, from Edward Snowden to what's his name? I feel bad because I can't remember his name right now. And that's kind of, Julian Assange. That's kind of what they do. They unperson someone. They put them out of mind's eye there. They bring it out of sight, out of mind. They've disappeared. And what did they really do? They just told you what was going on in your reality. And that is dangerous. For the controllers of reality. They hate that. They don't like that. And that's why now you just get unpersoned. And if unpersoned ain't enough, if that doesn't stop you, then they will physically throw you in jail for something. And I think what they're doing with the political arena is showing that the deep state government can and will charge anybody with anything that they feel like it. So if they don't like what you're saying, they'll just make up a crime and make it fit the scenario and throw you in jail, whether it makes sense or not. I mean, look at all the people, no matter how you feel about whether or not January 6th was planned or not planned or what was going on there, you do realize, anybody with common sense realizes that there were thousands and thousands of regular American patriotic people there waving flags. They had their phones. They were duped into all wearing the same uniform so the government can identify all the patriots or people that believe that idea. That was something that I noticed right away. Not saying it's planned, but I did notice it personally that in 2016 that there began to be something that I always find is the beginnings of the end for a country. It's when half of the population all wears the same outfit. It doesn't matter if you agree with the ideas or not. What it does is it segregates and takes away the privacy of people's political views. When I was a kid, I remember asking people, when I first realized there was Democrats and Republicans, and I was trying to figure it out, I would ask people like my grandpa and his friends, are you a Democrat or a Republican? They would say, hey, that's none of your business. That's rude. You shouldn't ask that. That's private information. That's but nowadays everybody wears a uniform and they think they're on one of the sides of this uniparty. And you could go over into Europe and you find the same thing. Even if they have 3 or 4 parties at the head of it, they're voting and they're agreeing for the same things. And these edicts are getting handed down from someone somewhere, and they're no longer hiding. They make groups. It used to be Bilderberg was a conspiracy theory, but now we know that's just a lower rung of some kind of organization that runs us from the top. And now they're calling it the World Economic Forum, where they do it live streaming and they tell us what they're doing. But if you take that same information and talk about it, you'll be banned, censored, and unpersoned. And does that sound like a free country to you? I mean, just speaking for Americans, there's something wrong with that. And that goes back to what I was saying about there is hope. Thank God for immigrants that came from other places that got a taste of where this kind of behavior leads and what it means. And hopefully, people will wake up and step out of the authoritarianism nightmare that they're allowing to happen around them. But in case that doesn't happen, there's hope in the fact that there's millions of people that are smart enough and have enough ingenuity to create little micro economies. And speaking of that, while you kind of think about that, I wanted to show you guys an article about the Venezuelan prison. Now think about this. This is a country where people were eating the animals in the zoo because they went to socialism and everything fell apart. The military started driving around saying, you know what, I like that building, I'm taking it. I like that, I'm taking it. And that's what happens at the end of that. And we're getting real close to that here in the U.S., where the government outweighs any kind of rights. And that's the reason they want to destroy inalienable rights, or at least mandate them into oblivion, where you're always tied up in court trying to prove that the government took away your right in some way. But in Venezuela, in that country that fell apart, they go into the prison and they find there's a casino, there's a nightclub, they got a zoo in there. They're living the high life in a little micro economy in a failed country where people were eating literally the zoo animals.
Well, you would expect nothing less. Economies are always going to evolve out of the chaos. People are not going to stop living because an event took place. Well, you know, we'll go right back to the Younger Dryas. I mean, people did not give up, even though it was the worst time in humanity in the last 12,000 years. And then subsequently the cooling and then the heating coming out of that, and that massive heat spike coming straight out of that extreme cold period. I mean, straight up, literally straight up. You know, you look at these, they're talking in a 10-year period, the entire planet rose multiple Celsius degrees. And it just kept on a climbing over that century. It went up, what, 12, 15 Fahrenheit? You know, out of the Younger Dryas, you need to really take a look at those temperature charts because they're startling. And you can see how they always end their charting around 8,000 years ago because they don't want to include that. But even I'll give you the last 8,000 years, you know? It's just, it didn't matter the calamity. People are always going to want to barter. They're always going to want to trade. People always have something extra that they're going to want to, you know, get or exchange for something else. Again, you know, you go through some of these really lean periods in continents around the world in the last 100 years, or last 150 years even in places where there were famines after the famine was only for a couple of years. And again, you got to think about that. Some of the craziest, most, you know, tear-jerking events of the last 150 years, it seems that they never really last longer than a couple of years. You know, there's nothing that's an eternity. Even if you find some of these countries, go to, say, Cambodia, for example. That wasn't like a 30-year event of the tumultuousness. It was definitely squeezed into a couple of years of very tough period, but on either side of that, you know, coming in and out, food started to come back, trade came back, a thing. Look at the Mao era also. And there was that Deng Xiaoping, you know, to become rich is glorious, and then Hong Kong opens up with the Pearl River Delta, and then, you know, now it's swung back into a little more tight control. But you look at these famines that have occurred across time, and most of the famines, you know, is like, you know, no more than 2 years. So you got to think, if we're just talking about famine this time, will it be global? Probably not, because everybody can grow food in warmer climates. Even if you're completely disrupted and there's a war going on in your area, after forces pass, you're still going to put your gardens back together. You know, read about the accounts in Bosnia, Herzegovina, and all these places along what was the former Yugoslavia. You know, they were still farming right in the middle of the fighting. And that seemed to be the same, you know, especially in more temperate climates, especially when you get down the Mediterranean, you get places where you can grow food all year. I mean, Vietnamese, they just kept on growing when the Americans, after they were bombing. They didn't actually stop doing it. They just had to live with it. So think about these changes, like the opportunity there, and, you know, people are always going to be trading something. Now, food will be currency for a time. Now, don't delude yourself that it's going to be like that forever. It's sure not. Gold and silver is going to have its day also, where you could pay off your house with an ounce of silver, or, you know, you could buy a city block for an ounce of gold like they did in Weimar Republic. 6-floored buildings for an ounce of gold. I was reading all about the Weimar Republic. it would cost you something like 40 times more than you bought a pair of brand new leather shoes for just to buy a pair of shoelaces at the end of it. Another famous one was to repair a window in your home would actually cost you more than the purchase price of the entire home before hyperinflation. And there's countless stories like this. But people, what were they doing? They were trading the whole time. Nothing went to zero. And of course, after the hyperinflation, it got, like really, if you look at that, you come in 1917, it was getting a little, but then it was like 1921 to 23. And it seems like a lot of these really big, gigantic civilization disrupting events, whether it's economy or it's food, seem to be limited to like these 2-year windows. So keep that in mind too. It's not going to be a 10-year, 20-year thing. It's going to be in and out. People are going to reestablish. People are going to rebuild. People are going to get so tired of not having comfort that they're going to require it to change. And this is what me and Rance have been talking about forever, is like when enough people think something and start to move to action, something actually changes. And once you push people where they don't have anything left to change, they're going to change it whether you want it to be changed or not. And a lot of times that's when you see the end of movements. You see the beginning of, hey, something just broke down the wall, fell in Germany, whatever. I mean, you see this again and again and again. You get people pushed back into a corner so far. They get pushed there, don't get me wrong. But they never stay there. And during that whole time, people are still trading until they realize, man, this is just terrible. It can't get any worse than this. We need to just go change things. And they do. So again, I'm trying to give it a hopeful message here. That even as bad as you think it is or might get, nothing is going to be forever. And look back, and I wish our really old grandparents were still with us to tell us about living through the Depression. Like my grandparents were old enough where they told me stories about living through the Depression. So my grandma would always save all these twist ties off the bread. Back then it was like white loaf, it was junk food in the 1970s, so it was healthier than health food today almost, But talking about that, when she would save so much stuff, she's like, well, we just couldn't get the stuff. We know no money was around. You couldn't get anything. And she's like, well, if you were to string the 50 of these, you could actually make some baling twine of the metal that's around there. You could always use things for something to create like just some metal string to hold something together. She's like, there's a million ways you could use this. I was like, okay, Grandma, yeah, whatever. I can go buy a bag of those. And she's like, you don't get it. It wasn't available. Like stuff just disappeared. She's, like to look at their life at then and go, why do you have all these twist ties? When I didn't experience growing up during that Depression as a kid, like they were all children, and not even being able to get it. So when you got it, they just squirreled away. And I know every one of you out there who have grandparents that grew up during that Depression, when you went in their house, they had stuff squirreled away. Man, they never saved it. They never threw away a thing after that event. But, they traded through, they bartered through, they did what they could to get through. And, it didn't last forever now, did it? Popped back up and boom. What was the result? Oh, gee, conflict. So this conflict seems to be a little bit different, a little bit differently directed. This is more of a movement of monies and wealth from one point on the planet to another. I mean, it always has been. Don't get me wrong. It always has been. But this one seems out of necessity for some earth changes that are inbound. That's the only way I can describe it to you. Something that the elite understand the cycles. They have way more information on it from the previous civilizations, which were pillaged for 500 years. Like that real core data that we'll never, ever, ever, never see. That's what they're going off of. So something really this way comes that's not controllable in terms of outside human influence, but money and wealth and whatever needs to be redistributed across the planet so it's still intact, whatever this thing is coming. And I'm wondering if it's not an energy wave of sorts. And the reason that they're moving their money is because they know this energy wave in these particular areas, maybe if there's different mineral constituents in the crust, could stop like energy come through, because the minerals themselves would glow or vibrate or put some resonant frequency around that incoming wave, where then they could keep their old systems in play, in tune, but then the rest of the people would have evolved off of there. So maybe it was a power play to hold their wealth in magnetic resonance safety zones. I don't know, man. I could go off on a tangent on that one. I try not to, because I sound half insane.
No, I don't think so. It's abundantly obvious that the continuities of government have planned for these different scenarios. Actually, while you were talking, I was showing those underground, reservoirs of culture, everything. Everything's down there. Cheese caves. Like I was looking at, they have 1.4 billion pounds of cheese stored underground from a program that started in the 70s. They continually put the cheese in there. It doesn't get used and no one eats it. I don't know what they do with it. Like, they tried to sell some of it before and stuff because it gets old and moldy after a while. But that's just an anecdotal kind of thing that's going on down there. They're keeping copies of everything, like Seinfeld, year 8, 1996, 1997, from Warner Brothers. See, I'm not showing the picture, but here we go. There's that. So they have massive underground cities, and this is just the commercial ones. So what we're talking about here is just the commercial locations. So imagine what continuity of government has. Here's a layout of in there, and it's an endless maze. It's a giant endeavor, something that the ancients were doing, this exact thing, carving out. Matter of fact, the thing in Turkey looks, real similar to this. Is that what they were doing? Was that a continuity of government for some kind of earth-changing event that happened at the time? We'll never know that. There's different theories about whether it was cold, whether it was bolides, what was it that they were hiding from? Who was it that was hiding? But after that, many generations of different cultures came along and used it. Because like you said, nothing lasts forever. So people came along and found it. And maybe they'll do this too with these stashes, which are basically like a modern high-tech version of like a Clovis stash with tools, and stuff to get stuff going again. But under here in continuity of government, because this is the part that's not even classified, what this is commercial. Now, believe it or not, these commercial entities have people that run it, and they're rich. And if you don't think that they're also having some kind of continuity plans for themselves and their legacy, their family, their business, their sway on society, whatever it is, when they come out of this thing, you can see that they're already planning for it, especially our government. And, we talk a lot about different things that could happen, and the most likely thing that would really sway Earth and change it, and it may be, like I said, some of the stuff we don't really have to worry about, but that's only because we can't do nothing about it. But like here's one. This isn't even Apophis that may or may not, collide a little bit in 2042. And when you think about these dates, some of them are not that far off from what we think of civilization now. This is something that your great-grandchildren may be dealing with. But guess what? You were talking about the Depression. My grandmother did grow up in the Depression, and she did pass down these ideas. And speaking of that, I still to this day am partially living off the prepping that they did back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. They continued this behavior all the way until, they died. But they taught me how to do things, and I still have, like tools and different things that were stored and saved. And my grandmother used to save everything. She, like I said before to you, my grandpa would joke that they were going to go broke trying to save money, because she would go out and anytime there was a deal on something, whether she liked it or not, if it was some kind of food or survival option, she'd go buy it all. 10 cents a can? Oh, yeah, we got like 40 cans of beets. And she was slowly trying to, circulate that through our diet. And, we could tell. And I didn't get it as a kid. Like, why are you buying all this extra stuff? Why is everything packed full of stuff that we don't even eat? Well, now I know the answer to that. And back to the NASA thing, they're prepared for the idea of everything being reset. NASA predicts large asteroid impact could be in Earth's future, and they're talking about a different one. I think this was Bennu, and they say, you know, there's a 0.037% chance in 2700, 1 in 2700 of it hitting Earth. But then when you realize what they're talking about, they're saying that they have no idea that it could be pulled into our planet or bounced around by the other planets. They just don't have the mathematical science to predict whether or not it would or wouldn't hit the Earth in any of these dates. But they are preparing for these things. You've heard of them looking for near-Earth objects. But the fact is, they mostly discover these on their way by, not on their way in. So by the time they discover them, they would have already destroyed Earth. So that's why I say you can't do nothing about it, and you don't have to worry about it. But if you live your legacy, I should say, because none of us are going to be around in 2182, they think it may go through what's called a gravity keyhole, which could send it on a collision course with Earth, hitting us in the year 2182. But don't worry about that. There's one called Apophis that might smack us in 2042, and if it doesn't smack us then, it could be pulled where it would come back around in, I think it's 2067, and make a direct hit. But the lesson to be learned is that even the so-called experts, scientists, and the people in control with the best technology on the planet, they have no idea what's out there or what could be coming in. And you got to remember this, the things that we're really worried about are these really rocky iron core bolides and asteroids that could make devastating explosions like the Tunguska explosion that we know happened. Can you imagine that explosion over Central Europe or New York City or Los Angeles or Dallas or, you name it, Memphis, Tennessee, any of those places, and just blew up over that? It would flatten trees and buildings for hundreds of square miles around if it was a small object. But the truth is they really don't know, and that's why they use might, maybe, could be, we don't know. That's the truth. And these things come in so often that there's, a good chance that what you were talking about may hold some weight. If these things are coming in on cycles that we could predict once we see it and use our mathematics to find out where it could be in the future, that means you could also rewind it, correct? But not only that, if you had information about impacts or pass-bys of other objects that wasn't passed down to the communal knowledge of everyday you and me, but hidden in things like the burning of Alexandria or tucked away someplace in a Vatican library or, a file in a continuity of government office, you wouldn't even know about it, right? But it seems to be that whether we know about it or not, they are planning for the inevitability of something like this happening. There's the Adam and Eve story or something like that they had classified for some time. And it's kind of preposterous, the idea. But then when you start thinking about it, maybe the reason they hid it is because they didn't want people to know that smaller, more reasonable sized, still devastating tsunamis could happen at any time, from earth changes, from massive earthquakes to impacts happening. And they didn't want people thinking about, large amounts of ocean rolling over landscapes and totally wiping out civilization. So when you know all this, does that mean that we need to each in our own individual way prepare some kind of continuity of civilization, or at least, if in a more relatable way, continuity of legacy, meaning that your children, your grandchildren, and possibly even their children and children will be taught some of the lessons, things that you're learning, things that you're making important in this day, to pass on to them. Because let's face it, the public education is kind of a lost cause. So if you're teaching your children and grandchildren skills, tricks, like, it's late in the season and I have all these pumpkin plants growing everywhere, but they're not likely to build any grow any pumpkins by then. But I've been playing with the extra time that I have by messing around pollinating in them, and I've managed to pollinate the entire vine with just a little effort and a Q-tip, which means that if you went out in the springtime and you took the time to familiarize yourself with each and every flower of every plant that you're growing and give it a little human attention for a split second, in months' time, you are growing massive amounts of food. and that's like magic almost. I mean, other than creating life forms, as in children or plant growth, farming, I've never actually seen any real magic on this planet except for that. Gardening and plants and animals seem to be very magical or spiritual, if you want to use that word. And so, do we need to take it seriously that all of the other powers that be that have existed in some form or fashion, handing down the torch of the right to rule, are preparing for something big? Should we take that seriously? Should we take it at face value and prepare our own continuity of civilization? And kind of like what I said before, small, maybe not secret society so much, but the exchanging and the keeping of knowledge within groups so that it's out of the hands of the elite, whether or not they memory hole it or not. And that's the kind of hope that I see.
Yeah, because as you were talking, I've been trying to consolidate some stuff because we got the barn, we finished it up. Now we got the gravel in it and things. So I'm trying to move, some boxes up in the attic and move them out and thing. And I came across this today and I brought it down for the show. When I was traveling over in the Czech Republic, there was this area, since you talked about, vast underground cities. Now everybody knows Derenyanku and Cappadocia and Goreme and these areas in Turkey, and is pretty familiar with it. It's the famous ones. But there's this one in the Czech Republic that's incredible. Also, it's called Neumo, and I'll spell it for you because it's kind of got an unusual spelling. You spell it Z-N-O, J as in Jacob, M-O, Neumo. And the catacombs supposedly were built over the last several thousand years. And they come up under the Neumo Castle, which was built in, say, 1279 AD. So these catacombs were there long before even some of the most, what you consider ancient of castles and that sort of thing. But let me read it for you here. Under Neumo, it has 30 kilometers of passages, labyrinths, rooms, chambers. They call it a 4-story maze, is one of the largest in Europe. But you never heard it. We never heard of this one. The only reason we knew about it is because we went to this town passing through to go to Vienna. It's in the wine country, and mainly it produced white wines in this region. Super incredible wine. Like every one we tasted was just like dynamite. Like they had very little export of the wines. Most of it was grown locally, consumed locally. They didn't really export. So some of the best wines you're ever going to get is like, you rock into the place and the place they're growing it is like 3 miles that way or 10 miles that way, and this is the production from those vineyards. But think about today's world. Like, why would you need to construct more than 18 miles of 4 different floors under what is considered a town or city? There was no town or city above ground. So that's the whole thing. If you try to compare it to a regular town or a city, you have to think, are there 18 miles of streets in a small town? Well, this, apparently, they said 40,000 people could live under the ground. And that they did for many periods of time. They kept saying, oh, it was marauders, it was this, it was that. But was it? Or was it earth changes where they had to run underground? They had to survive. Because you think about, if the earth pounded something with meteorites or plasma discharge, you would be underground. It's like an enormous amount of places around the world. Now, Ransom, you could probably attest better, because some Anasazi and some Hopi, the foundations and that sort of thing under the cliffs or the cliff dwellings, I mean, they were seeking shelter there. But it seems to be a normal thing where humanity seeks shelter underground. And they try to say, well, it's because of invading armies, but the air shafts were so easily visible that it was almost like a no-brainer. Like, why would you ever devise a city like this that could be so easily covered over and the air supply turned off with just, like, even minimal effort? It wasn't that. It was something very different. It was like they were literally running underground to hide either from electricity, plasma, bolides, frequency. Again, if you look at some of these minerals that are in the rocks where they've dug these cities, a lot of it's sandstone, easy to work tufa. You know, nothing's in granite with all that quartzite and thing. The dolmens were a lot of times made out of huge pieces of granite. So imagine the conductivity of that, or the frequency resonance of that. If there's a different energetic frequency coming through off of our sun, and there's some kind of, you know, waves that are sweeping through our galaxy and are then straight into our solar system that sweep past the sun and affect every single planet here. If you were covered by granite, you got to check out dolmens also if you're unfamiliar, the little rock sort of structures made. There were millions of them across the planet before. Most of them have been reclaimed and used in road building projects and building, etc. Because the slabs are quite large. They're sort of squared off. Some are perfect, some are not so. But, you know, if you're a road builder or constructor, you look at that and go, well, that's going to be a nice big cornerstone right there or something. But I don't get it, Ransom. Like, I know, like, Noimo, you never hear about this city. Why does everybody hear about Derinyenku and they always hear about the Turkish cities? You hear about some Greek underground complexes. But what is it about the rest of the world where we're just not privy to truly how many of these cities? I mean, there's a ton of them in Russia as well. A ton of them. And not the recent ones that they built in the last, you know, since the 1980s for the populace. We're talking, you know, going back, you know, 500, 700, 800, 1,000 years or more. So one thing, you know, Ransom, I'm curious about what you saw with the cave dwellings and things when you all were running around looking at the petroglyphs, at the plasma petroglyphs when you were doing some exploration.
Well, I've seen a lot of cliff dwellings. What I think is kind of more remarkable is the vocal tradition, or the living tradition of history, the telling of stories history that has continued for, you know, nobody knows how long. But whatever the case, they also wrote depictions down on rocks. And right here where I live is a place called Three Rivers. And there is a little mystery, like, you know, we don't know what they were trying to convey as far as information totally. Some of it's pretty easy to understand, like, you know, what kind of animals live there. You can get some semblance of that there's different waves of people coming through, like there's Aztec style petroglyphs, and there's you know, depictions of people that look like robots or Mayans, and you know, Cyclops, even people with 6 fingers, feet with 6 toes, and there's all of that. But on top of that, there's little weird pictorial map-like messages that I've been looking at. And matter of fact, I sent you a peer-reviewed paper from this Chinese woman that's studying the connection. Let me remember what the right dynasty is, but the connection between one of the Chinese dynasties and the petroglyphs in the Southwest, meaning that there may have even been other, more explorers from all over the place coming through at different times and writing down messages. But one of the weirdest things is, in my opinion, and I've never heard anybody talk about this, there is at least 5 different pyramid depictions, some of them with different animals that exist at Three Rivers, which are pointed towards the only 12,000 foot peak within, I don't know, 600 or 700 miles at least before you get to the maybe it's less, maybe 500 miles till you get to where the Rocky Mountains start actually making tall peaks. But anyway, just south of that is the massive Carlsbad Caverns, right? And there are also these caves here in New Mexico and also northern Mexico that have giant selenite crystals. And I'm talking about something that looks magical, like something the size of a school bus that's just one crystal and with a bunch of other giant ones. So like an underground area that just would blow your mind. But there's these depictions at Three Rivers, just north of all of that, that show this pyramid with an entrance by the water that goes under it. And I have several photographs of this. There's some with just lightning above the pyramid. There's one with a frog that's above the pyramid. There's one with two maybe doves or something like that facing each other, which is really reminiscent of things in the Middle East, other symbols that I've seen before. There's depictions of stuff like Set, like a weird Egyptian-looking depiction. So it's very possible that people were passing information along through these oral traditions, and some of those traditions say that the people of this area came out of the earth from the old world, from the last world. And this is a similar, I'm talking about the Hopi legends of coming out of the Grand Canyon, of some kind of area where they lived in, where the ant people helped them, saved them from whatever was going on, and they were brought into the new world that we now live in today. It's very similar to the Aztec story of coming out of caves, and they also are probably came from the North American area of the Americas, big time corn people, and there's connections everywhere. Matter of fact, there's a whole what seems to be a small city that they're calling a kiva that has all kinds of Aztec artifacts, macaw feathers, blades that are from there. We find Mesoamericans up here that were the victims of cannibalism and Chaco Canyon. Now keep in mind that Chaco Canyon was created about 600 AD. Now that's only about 30 years-ish or 40 years after this massive worldwide phenomenon that happened with probably multiple volcanoes going off and killing people in China by the millions. There's plenty of documentation through Europe and the Mayan Empire. They just stopped and ceased for like 150 years. They didn't do anything. But up here in the Four Corners area, it seems like people were moving around, and a new phenomenon in this area was building these kivas and building the cliff dwellings. And there's some debate on whether or not Anasazi is actually the ancestor of the Hopi and the Navajo, or they were a different people, because one translation is Ancient Ones, another translation is Ancient Enemy. So there's all of these references to other cultures here, but we know one thing for sure. This isn't the first time that this area had been decimated. But this time people started building stuff, right? Civilization started. They started really following the stars up here, all of which came from different places, it seemingly. But what you were talking about is that at one time there's reference to all of these people living in the earth, or at least hiding in it there for some time. And even the people that were depicting these pyramids seem to have some kind of reference to an entrance that goes under the mountain. And at the same place, you find ant people and squatter men and, the classic centipede-looking Pratt, design on the rock. And you find all of this here. And this is a place where people probably only 3,000 to 5,000 years ago were sitting here watching lava pour out of the earth and make a giant river of fire. So we know that that's happened. And if the government's planning on it, should we be digging tunnels?
I don't know. I sent you the bronze water vessel from 11th century BC, which is approximately 3,100 years ago. So, you got to realize that what you're talking about here and what's referenced that was found over on the canyons of the United States, they're talking like 1600 BC in the Bronze Age era. But see, what's interesting is this is where the oracle bone script split from the seal script, which was what you consider traditional Chinese writing, which was, evolved over time. But see, the oracle bone script, what's so interesting is the word for man or person is run, iga run, like run. It is a squatter man. In the oracle bone script, it looks exactly like a squatter man. But then if you look in today's, just modern dictionary of Chinese language, simplified, of course, Jiantizi, you'll see that the squatter man is there in the character person. Now, the oracle bone script is interesting too, is because that's when they would take tortoise shells, and the shamans or medicine men of the time would like write down the fortunes and the prophecies and these things for what was the emerging emperors of the time. This is, borderline prehistory here. When you start going back some, almost 4,000 years, not a lot is known about. But one thing about this, I was just over here looking up the time to make sure I had the correct dynasty that I was referencing. They use shell money, shell mussels in Tong Bay. Tong is two metals that are put together. It's like bronze, brass, tong. So it wasn't really exactly gold or silver. It was tong, like those two that were put together as smelted together in metallurgy. Maybe it was more valuable because you could make it into weaponry then. So you got to think about, in the infancy, there weren't too many bronze swords running around until later. But look where that is. It's in the northern part of China, just as you get up into the Yellow Sea area there. Because you got to realize that China's not what you know it is as today. Yeah, those kingdoms, fiefdoms, and emperors, they controlled an area, but what we understand is totally of China, that entire area was like warlords and kingdoms until they were brought under control. They call it the Three Kingdoms period, where all these kingdoms were fighting amongst themselves. Like, think about China, but break it up into provinces like today. And every province had its own warlord and its own set of kings and emperors evolving in and out of there and trying to take control over the emperorship itself. But the Warring States period, it's when everybody was fighting everybody else to be the number one. It was really like a Highlander episode. There's only one. There will be only one. And there was at the end of that. And that's what turned into what you consider Emperor Qin with the dynasty in Xi'an. And the Terracotta Warriors, that was the dude who brought it all together. Well, a subsequent line of the original one. Because, some of those dynasties lasted 300 years. But I'll tell you a fact, no dynasty's ever lasted longer than 400 years. And you might have to ask yourself, why is that? Well, perhaps these same repeating patterns that Ransom and I are speaking about are also reflected in China, never having an emperor or a dynasty last longer than 400 years. So the Qin dynasty itself, it wasn't just one person. You got to realize these are lineages of families that are going through multiple centuries that still retain the power. Like, there was the grandfather, there was the, the great grandfather, was the emperor. They kept that of their dynasty intact through family lineage until when? Oh, the mandate from heaven was removed, which means that the gods didn't give favor to the emperor of the time, and they couldn't grow food, and then they were overthrown and a new dynasty started. Now you gotta, and then again, when you start, there's star maps, and like when we look at star maps, we put them on the table, and we kind of look at them and reflect and go, okay, well, that'll be this one, and we kind of look off on the horizon. Well, their star maps were meant to be read by actually grabbing it with two hands and holding it up to the stars. And here's the thing, that emperor, where the emperor sits in heaven, they mapped out a Birkeland current from the Big Dipper. And in doing such, they created a cult of the Big Dipper. And for those of you who heard me talk about this, it's Beidou Qixing. And they still worship that. Today, Xi Jinping, the leader of China, still has that sect of followers of energies through the heavens. They never went away. They've always been here for thousands of years. And those types of families that are the keepers of the knowledge actually are more revered, or at least have equally as much power, but they're not in the political arena. They're just in the, they're beyond what you consider astronomers, because they have this, they understand the astronomy, they understand the astrology, but they also understand the electromagnetism and the signs in the heavens to show that the current is changing. Because the Chinese really believe that in the Big Dipper, the star systems that what we can know is the Big Dipper, like 200 light years away, is the seed point of human consciousness. That Birkeland current feeding from that comes to our star and affects it. Up or down, low current, low voltage, high voltage. Clean weather, they have the Feng Long, which is the windy dragon or the cloud dragon, and then they have, Feng Long, which is Yun Long and Feng Long. Like the what you consider fire dragon is a nice, tight, very highly, the magnetic field is really tight, and that creates less cloud cover on our planet. That's exactly what they're referencing. But the Yun Long, which means the cloudy dragon, definitely when there was more decrease in the field, more cosmic rays came in and it created more cloud cover, more floods. Like they mapped all of this out. And there's different sticks, and if you go into the temples, there's 36 of them that show the different heavenly energetic effects, and if you line them up, you can tell the story of the sun going from a high sun to a low sun and back up to high sun. You can actually do the full one cycle of the sticks that are in there that have the individual pictographs on top of them. But anyway, there's a lot more knowledge out here that's hidden from us. The elite understand that this cycle is back again. Why do you think the Chinese are really trying to get it in order? They realize that we're back at another one of these, and Xi Jinping will be the only one in recorded Chinese history ever to bring China through a change of this magnitude if he were to succeed and the country does not crumble due to food shortages. Anyway, Ransom, take us out, man.
Wow. I had so much to say, but we'll have to say it next week.
Please remember to subscribe to the show notes over on oilseedcrops.org/MIAC. Put your email in there, and Ransom and I are going to send you just brief notes of everything we talked about tonight so you can refresh your memory and then start the conversation with others through the week. oilseedcrops.org/MIAC. We'll see you later, Mini Ice Age Conversations. David DuByne, Ransom Godwin, signing off.
Thank you for listening to Revolution